Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, which is all about AI content. So today we've got Will Slater, who's the content strategist at 43 Clicks North. And so just before we start and I'll pass across to Will, what we'll do first is say, if you've got any questions at any point, please just drop them in on the Q&A option at the bottom of your screen. I'll keep an eye on those and we'll drop them in at the right time based on what Will's presenting to us. So today he's going to talk all about AI. It's something that blew up, especially last year with ChatGPT, and with that, everyone's looking at how they can use it to, especially from a content point of view, make lives easier. You see a hell of a lot more of this AI content out there, and I play a little game of trying to guess has someone written it manually or not these days with all the posts you see on LinkedIn. What we will do off the back of this is there'll be the recording of the webinar that I'll be sending out to everyone probably tomorrow. Once the recording's been processed and everything. But yeah, I guess I'll pass across to Will now to introduce himself and get us kicked off.
Brilliant. Well, like Andy said, I'm Will. I work at 43 Clicks North, writing copy and content. And I'm going to say it straight up. I'm not an expert in AI. I'm not a LinkedIn guru who's going to tell you how to 10 times your revenue by using this one simple prompt, because frankly, that's all nonsense. But what I am is a writer, and I'm also very curious. So when AI became a thing last year, like a lot of people did, I kind of jumped on it, had a look, typed some prompts in, tried to get to do something I liked, didn't really get any great results, and forgot about it for a while. As the months went on, I kind of noticed that there was still a lot of chat about AI, and I got a job at Taskland that I thought, do you know what? Maybe actually it could be useful with that. So I started experimenting and looking at it in a bit more depth. Excuse me. And I found that actually there's an awful lot you can do with AI. It's absolutely brilliant at some things. It's rubbish at others. What I'm going to talk about here is stuff that's worked for me. It's worked on the tasks I've been doing. It's look at it as a starting point, an experiment with make it work for you. It's probably not going to work exactly in the same way, but hopefully you'll find a jumping in point that you can use somewhere in this. So I'm going to start off by talking about some of the AI models that you can use, the different models, pros and cons of some of them. Then I'll talk a little bit about how I use them. I'll talk about stuff like producing bulk copy, using AI for research and ideas. I'll look at generating images with tools like Midjourney. And then I'm going to finish up by talking about some very specific writing tools that I use pretty much every day to help me write more efficiently. So let's wind back to when ChatGPT was first launched about a year ago. There we go. Next slide. So when it was launched, when it came on the scene, it was huge. It was going to change everything. Everyone was like, "Oh, AI, it's going to change the way we work. It's going to revolutionize everything." And there was a lot of talk in the copy and the content world about, is this it? Is all our work going to be done by AI? And it's not, because actually the words that ChatGPT and other AIs tend to write tend to be pretty bland and pretty robotic. The reason for this is that AI is not a person. It's not actually intelligent. It doesn't understand what it's doing. It just uses the text and the words that it's been trained on, which is basically the internet up to a certain point, depending which model you're using, to work out a sequence of letters based on what you've asked. So like Andy said, you can spot copy that's come from an AI generator from miles off. It's getting better, and people are getting better at prompting it, but there's also tools out there now which will tell you if something's AI written. So it's not there. It's not the kind of thing you don't want to slip into an AI, ask it to write an article, and expect to get a thought leadership piece for your brand, because it's not going to be great. It's not going to have your tone of voice, and it's not going to have your industry expertise. So let's have a look at some of the different robots that you can use right now for free if you want to. So there are loads. There are some apps which are built specifically for writing copy and content. But what I found is a lot of them seem to run on the same models, and being able to use them natively, so being able to go into something like ChatGPT and prompt it yourself rather than going to something like Chat AI and using their sliders, gives you much more flexibility and power over what you want to do and what you can do. So I'm just going to talk about ChatGPT, Bard, Claude, and Microsoft's Bing Copilot AI. They all work in pretty much the same way. You've probably tried them. You type into a chat window and a robot on the other end replies. It's a bit like chatting to Johnny Five on Slack. They've all got their pros and cons. So let's have a quick look at each one. So ChatGPT is the original. It's the one that burst onto the scene in early January last year, whenever exactly it was. And arguably, it's still the best. It's still ahead. There's a big difference between the paid version, which uses GPT-4, and the free version, which uses GPT 3.5. Everything I talk about today, unless I specifically mention, is going to be using the free versions of these tools. So I'm going to be talking about GPT 3.5. The main difference is GPT-4 has live access to the internet, so you can send it off to websites and ask it to search them. And it has a few other upgrades as well. It's got stuff like image generation built in, and it's generally smarter. It's pretty much way above everything else. But 3.5 is also really good. You just have to bear in mind that it's not live. It only knows the internet up to, I think, January 2022. So you can't just ask it to search for something. You're allowed to use anything it writes commercially, and it saves all your chats in a really easy to access format, which actually is really handy. You also, one of the key things with ChatGPT is I've never hit a prompt limit. So it's never stopped me and said, you can't ask me any more questions today. Both of these things are really handy once you start getting into training, which we'll talk about in a little bit. Bard is Google's big AI hub. It is live on the internet, as you would expect from Google. So you can just head over to Bard and ask it to search for a website. I paste the URL in there. It's completely free to use, and it had a big upgrade in December. It went from running, I think it was called Palm, the old model, to the new Gemini model. There's 3 levels of Gemini. If you go onto the website and use Gemini, you're using Gemini Pro. Gemini Ultra is going to be the industrial level one, but that's not available yet. And Gemini Nano is kind of like a stripped down mini version, which runs on device on your phone if you've got something like a Pixel. It saves all your chats, which is really handy. It currently says that you can use it. It's copied commercially. It used to say you couldn't, so be a little bit wary. There's a lot of discussion about whether AI copy actually can be copyrighted, because obviously it's not written by a human. It's written by a machine trained on other people's work. That's a whole different conversation for another day, but it's worth bearing in mind. I'm not a huge fan of Bard. I struggle to get it to write in a way I like, and it seems to make stuff up a lot. Interesting point. Oxford Dictionary's word of the year last year was hallucination, because that's the term that's used when AIs just make stuff up, which they tend to do quite often, as I've discovered. I've also discovered recently that they're prone to sycophancy, whereby if you question the data that an AI has given you, it will change its answer, even if that answer was actually correct. So the key point there is always double check what your AI is right, and especially if you're asking it questions, because it might just be making it up. Claude, like ChatGPT 3.5, it's not online. It's not on the internet. It can be used commercially. It does save your chats. It's probably joint favorite, I think, with ChatGPT for me for actually getting it to write stuff. The problem I have with Claude, well, there's 2 problems really. It seems to vary with the number of prompts you can actually have, which it can be sometimes be a bit tight if you're trying to train it to do something specific. And if it's busy, it can get really slow and a little bit crashy, which is a right pain when you're trying to work. When it's working well, it's brilliant. So it's worth experimenting with. And then Copilot, which used to be called Bing, is essentially a hamstrung free version of ChatGPT-4, which sounds brilliant, but actually the limitations make it not that useful. So it's live on the internet as an extension of Bing Search. You can just go on there and chat to it. It says it saves your chats, but as far as I can tell, it actually just saves the queries. It doesn't save the whole conversation, which really limits its usefulness. Again, it's a bit vague about whether you can use it commercially or not. It used to say in the terms and conditions that you couldn't, but that's changed quite recently. But the main downside is it's really limited on how many prompts you can have. It varies depending on what browser you're using, whether you're signed in, and who you're signed in as. Linking accounts and doing other stuff can help and give you more. At the moment, I've managed to get me 30, which is not bad, but not brilliant. But not being able to save your chats makes it fairly useless for any kind of training. It also has 3 levels, so you can select creative, balanced, or precise, which I've not found hugely useful. And it has a version of the DALL-E 3 image generator, which is part of ChatGPT-4 built in, which is, well, it can't touch Midjourney, to be honest, and the quality is not brilliant. Excuse me. So I kind of mentioned a little bit ago that AI is not that brilliant at just writing your copy. So what is it good for? I like to use it to do the really boring, rubbishy jobs that you really need to do. They're a really important part of your workflow, but nobody actually really wants to do them. So it's the kind of thing that if you had someone doing work experience, you might be quite tempted to give to them or your intern. If you can use an AI to take up this dull work, it frees up your capacity to do the really creative, high-value stuff that AI is rubbish at. And it means if you don't have a work experience kid, then you can actually give them something interesting to do, which is a win all around, really. So I'm going to go through a few things that I've tried doing. Some of them will work better than others, but it's a constant refinement process. So it may be that something that doesn't work well now works really well with the next update of whichever AI I'm trying it with. So I've kind of broken into 4 sections. The first one is about writing what I think of as words that will do. So it's not brilliant for your important words. I imagine if you've got a website, you've got really important stuff like your homepage, your product landing pages, that kind of thing. They're your important words. Don't go close to them with AI. Then you've got your kind of mid-level stuff like your blogs and your thought leader articles. They're the kind of things where I'll use it to help. I'll use it for research and planning, that kind of thing, but I wouldn't expect to write it. And then you've got stuff that's, you need it there, you need it for SEO, but you know that not many people are going to look at it. It's not high value. They're probably going to scroll past it, but you do know that it's going to help your site authority. So I'm going to talk about those first. I'm also going to talk about research, image generation, and stuff like spelling and grammar checking, and generally helping you to write better copy. So when I say words that will do, here's an example. I'm going to use bikes because I really like bikes. So the Trek website, if you go on the Trek website, it's got a list of all their UK dealers on there, and there are loads of them. There's about 300. And they have next to no actual content. So they've got a map, which is fairly useful. They've got an address, and they've got some opening times, which I would be loath to trust if I was going there. But there's no body copy. There's no actual information about the shop. So does it have a car park? Do they sell mountain bikes or road bikes or e-bikes? Has it got a workshop? Do they do coffee? What's it like? You have to go to the shop's website for that, which takes you off the Trek website, which isn't brilliant UX. And having that body copy there, even if it's generic and not brilliant, is great for your search engine optimization. Probably never going to rank brilliantly, but it can help boost your site's authority. And it's a better experience for any users that do happen onto the page. So what do? You could go through and you could write 300 shop descriptions by hand, which is going to be really slow and really dull. It's the kind of thing that you'll say, I'll make it a Friday afternoon job. And then you'll maybe do 1 a month and then give up. You could get the work experience kid to do them. Again, they're not going to get through 300 on their work experience, and they probably won't be that great. You could try outsourcing to someone on Fiverr or something like that. Might be all right, might not. Probably going to be quite expensive for not much reward. You could ask each shop to do their own copy. Realistically, what you're probably going to get then is a copy and paste from their website if they ever get around to it, which is not really what you need. And, you know, they're bike people, they're not writers, so why should they? Or you could use AI to help you out. So let's get into the good stuff. How do you use AI to get through hundreds of words in the time that it takes you to make a cup of tea? It's all about picking the right AI tool first, and then it's about using the right prompts and the right workflow. So I prefer ChatGPT for this at the moment. This might change next week if somebody else updates something. Give them all a go, see what works best for you. So I'm going to take you through the prompts that I would use to build this kind of model to write me this copy for the shops. So I always like to start by just saying hello and priming the AI for what I want it to do. I also always recommend being polite and saying please and thank you, which may sound a bit weird, but anecdotally, there are people who are out there who swear they get better results when they say please and thank you to their AI. And I figure it can't do any harm. And you never know, if the AIs do take over, they might like you a little bit better. But I find telling you what you can ask it to do, it seems to help frame its mind, get it in the right mindset, if you like, about what you're going to do. When you hit enter on this, it will say something like, yes, I'm happy to help. And it'll ask you to provide you with the copy along with any preferences or specific goals you have, which is brilliant. So the next thing I want to do is give it a tone of voice to use. You'll see people out there who use massive long prompts in their AI stuff. I find it works better to train it through multiple prompts because you can kind of filter it down and chisel away at it and just finesse what you want it to do through the multiple prompts and tweak things as you go along, rather than having to spend ages writing a single giant prompt. Might work better for you. Try it, see what works. You generally need to be quite specific with what you ask, or it'll get confused. You have to remember you're not actually talking to a person. So I like to lay out exactly what you want and what you don't. In this example, obviously I don't have access to Trek's tone of voice guidelines. So I pasted a big chunk of copy from the website to give it an example. If you've got tone of voice guidelines, that's brilliant. You can copy those in. You can just explain how you want it to write. Sometimes that can be quite efficient. You can even ask it to write like a famous person or author, which generally is quite amusing, but doesn't necessarily give you results that you'd actually want to use on your website. And it's not really very good at it. It might get the right words, but it'll really nail the kind of the cadence and style of how someone talks. But like I said, you'll experiment, try it. It depends a lot on how strong your brand's tone of voice is. When you hit enter on this one, it'll say something like, yep, go ahead and share. I'll be sure not to rewrite it. And then it'll probably rewrite it for you anyway. It doesn't matter. It'll still do what you want, even if it has rewritten the copy. But it's an example of how AIs aren't intelligent. They aren't smart. They're not actually listening to you. The more copy you give it, as I said, the better chance there is of getting something in the right tone of voice. It will still sound like it's written by an AI, but it'll sound better. At this point, it'll usually figure out what you're getting at once you input this prompt. Different ones respond a little bit differently, and you'll need to tailor your prompts to their responses a little bit. Claude works pretty well as ChatGPT. Bard can be okay, but it varies. It'll say something about, great, share the text you want rewritten, and I'll get to work. At which point, you paste in the copy you want your AI to rewrite. If you've got 300, obviously this is going to be the longest, faffiest part of the whole process. So in the example I've just used, I had to go to the shop website, find the About Us page, make sure that the text from there is appropriate. So for example, on a bike shop, it might mention other brands of bike, which you obviously don't want on your Trek website. So you could ask it not to include those. In my experience, it'll usually get it wrong. It'll make a big deal about how the shop's an exclusive Trek dealer, even though it's not, and then mention other brands anyway half the time. And you kind of get into this circle of prompting it and asking it to do things, and it'll get one thing right, and then I'll get another thing right, but the other thing wrong. And it's a lot easier just to give it the information you want first off. It's slightly more effort on your part initially, but it can save you a lot of work in the long run. If you're using something that's actually online, you can ask it to go to the website and get the info itself, which is brilliant if it works. Sometimes it does. Sometimes it just makes stuff up. And I find a lot of the time you spend so much time checking that it hasn't just imagined something that was on the website. It's quicker just to go get the info yourself. They're all prone to this. I don't know any of them are particularly worse than the others. And at this point, it'll spit out the copy, which is, it's probably not brilliant. It's not the greatest copy. You could have done it better yourself, but it would have taken longer and it wouldn't be a very fun job to write 300 on. So you ask it to do another one. It'll say, that's fine. You stick some more text in. Brilliant. You've got another one. And you can keep going through. Sometimes it'll get the idea and it'll say, ask at the end of each one, do you want another one? Sometimes it won't. But if it doesn't, you can always say, can you do another one, please? Paste it in, and it'll keep spitting them out until the cows come home. It's worth having a quick scan of them just to make sure that all the information is still correct and it's not misconstrued anything. But because you've given it specific text and specific information, it's usually pretty bang on. You're not going to have to do much, if any, rewriting at all. And because that chat's saved, that trained GPT is still there. It's always there. You can do 10 now, then log off for the day, come back tomorrow, end of the day. It's a brilliant end of the day job. Paste a bunch more in, and you've got 10 more. And before you know it, it doesn't take that long to get through 300. And, you know, if you were writing them yourselves, it's a long job. I also like to get it to write meta descriptions, which threw up what for me, I found this absolutely bizarre, is that AIs can't count. They just can't. No matter how specific you are about your meta description not being more than 160 characters, 9 times out of 10, it'll be north of 200. Quite often, it'll be closer to 300. And you'll ask it to shorten it, and it'll then write something different, but quite often the same length. I've found if you experiment with using lower numbers, if you ask it for 120 characters, certainly in Claude and ChatGPT, it'll usually get something that's closest to 160. But it is pretty good at getting the call to action at the end, so swings and roundabouts. But still, it's a much quicker way to get out those meta descriptions quickly and efficiently, and they'll be all right. They won't be great. You could do it better yourself, but they don't need to be the best things ever. So that's a pretty efficient way to smash out some content it's words that'll do. And it'll work on any of the 3 models. I wouldn't recommend using the Bing just because you run out of prompts and it doesn't save it. And once you've got it trained and working, you then lose it, which, you know, it doesn't save you the time like it should do. As I've said, I think ChatGPT is probably my favorite here. So as long as you're logged on, that GPT will still be there. You can go back to it. You will start to notice that it repeats phrases and words. And interestingly enough, these are quite often similar across models. If you do the same prompts and the same copy across models, you'll start to see similarities. You get things like a new superstar awaits, and they all have a really weird affinity for words like nestled. But I guess they're all trained on the same internet, so I guess it kind of makes sense. You can ask them not to use specific words or phrases. I find that can have varying degrees of success. Sometimes it won't. Sometimes it'll just rewrite them in different words. If you've got access to a paid GPT-4 subscription, you could theoretically automate this even further by uploading a spreadsheet of copy and asking it to rewrite the whole thing. I've not tried this. It's something I quite like to do. If you have it go, let me know, because I'd be interested in knowing how it goes. So the next thing on the list is how you can use AI to help with research and ideas. I find this really useful, and there's a lot of ways that it's kind of got me over writer's block, if you like. And it's also where the online models like Bard and ChatGPT-4 come in really handy because you can ask them about the actual live internet. Although depending on what you're asking, the non-online ones can be almost as useful in different ways. So here's just a few things that I tend to do when I'm sort of brainstorming myself, I guess, planning ideas and things. Try them, tweak them, see what works with best with your workflow. So the summary, right? This one came from a real article I was working on. So imagine you're writing an article about the differences between generations of Intel CPUs. I quite enjoy it because I'm a bit of a nerd about stuff like that. But there is an absolute ton of information out there about this kind of thing. Probably too much if you're trying to write a concise article for people who aren't massive nerds. So there's pages and pages of wiki for each CPU, and there's tons of information on the Intel website. And actually, what you just want is a few key differences between each one. So just go to your AI and ask it, and it'll give you the key differences between each one. And you'll probably still want to go double check and make sure that those key differences are correct. In this instance, they were. It got it pretty much spot on. It might ask you to be more specific. Again, when I put this in, it said that's too much. Can you be more specific? So I tried asking it for. I think it actually asked me if it could write it about different generations of core CPU, so the I generations, which was perfect. That was actually what I needed. So you may find if you've got a really big subject, you might need to narrow it down and cut it down a bit. But it's a really good way. It cuts out potentially hours of combing through reams and reams of information for the bits you actually want and figuring out which bits are pertinent to what you're talking about. Right now, this one should be massively useful, and I'm hoping that at some point the AIs are going to catch up and figure it out and be really useful. But it's only kind of useful at the moment. And the problem is, as we mentioned before with the meta descriptions, AIs can't count. So if you ask Bard or Bing or any of the online ones to go to do a search, look at the results, and do a word count for each of them, you'd think it could do that quite well, or it would just say it couldn't. It just makes it up. I've tried it on all the different AIs. I've tried it on lots of different search terms and websites, and the word counts bear absolutely no relation to what's actually on the pages, which is a real shame because it's a fairly key part of my research when I'm looking at writing an article is to see what the ranking articles, what kind of word count they use. What is really useful is asking it about commonly used terms. This does seem to be quite accurate. It'll give you a list of popular terms on each page, and then it'll give you a summary of terms that are used across the top pages. This can be really useful. It's the kind of thing that it would take you quite a long time to go through and scan, oh, well, that's in there, and that's in there, and that's in there, and put together. But it just gives you straight away. It annoyingly, sometimes it doesn't give you the URLs. I think it used to in the old model on Bard, but it currently doesn't, which is a bit of a pain when you're referencing stuff. Bing is actually better at that. And weirdly, sometimes when you do that search on Bing and then go to Google and do the same search, it will give you slightly different results. Not completely different. Generally, you'll get the same. They'll be in the top 10 if you've asked for the top 5, and some will be in there. But it's worth bearing in mind. But to give you an idea about those common terms, it's really useful. Now, this is a really useful one. I wouldn't suggest doing this as your only way of coming up with suggestions for what you're going to write. You want to combine this with some actual keyword research and your own research. But if your mind's hit a blank and you've been having a browsing through your SEMrush or whatever, and you just look and you go, I can't find any useful keywords to target, ask ChatGPT. It'll come with 10 ideas, and most of them will probably be really obvious and rubbish, and you'll already have written them. So you ask it for 10 more, and then 10 more, and then 10 more, and you keep asking it, and it'll keep spitting things out. And amongst it, most of it will be rubbish or too obvious, but amongst it, you'll find the odd nugget of gold that you can actually finesse into something different. You can go off and do your keyword research on that and think, actually, yeah, there's some keywords there that we're not ranking for that are relevant. That's a great start. You can also, what one thing that is I find quite handy is it'll come up with a bunch of ideas. Ask it to come up with ideas similar to ones it's already had, and then it'll give you a bunch of things around that idea, which again can help you just think, oh yeah, that would work. I also quite like it just to go asking it just to go crazy, go nuts, think of some crazy ideas. Most of them will be crazy and terrible, but every now and then you'll just get that nugget that just sets that little thing going in your brain. And you think, oh yeah, that's a really good idea. And you can do it in a few minutes. It's not something you need to spend lots of time on. It can just speed up that process of coming up with ideas that little bit. So once you've got your article title, once you've figured it out with a bit of help from AI or otherwise, whichever, it doesn't really matter. Chat GPT or whatever can be really good at helping you plan the structure of that article. You'll probably want to tweak it. You'll want to change it up and make it match your tone of voice, your website, whatever. But it can give you a really good starting point. Now, from here on, you could just go write the article in your own tone of voice with your own set of knowledge, and quite often that is what I do. Or you could go one step further and get the AI to give you a first draft. So you'll notice that the prompt I've put here is different to the prompt I asked about in the previous question. So the reason for that is I find if you ask an AI to write a long article with lots of headings in, which is what it'll give you if you ask for a plan, it'll write you a super fluffy, lightweight piece with no actual meaty, valuable information whatsoever. You get like a sentence or two under each heading, which is not what you want at all. And you see that quite often. It's an easy way to spot an AI article. If it's just fluff, that's a good sign. But if you take each sector heading and ask it to write a detailed article about that, you'll actually get something that's a few hundred words and has some depth and some decent information in there. So you can take all those separate headings, slot those together, and you've got what I like to call a shitty first draft. Some writers hate this idea, some love it, but I subscribe to it. When I'm writing a first draft, I will just smash it out. I won't stop to think about grammar or whether I'm writing decent quality or anything like that. I just knock it out, and that'll do. And then I come back to it in a day or two, or I rewrite it, and then I rewrite it as a second draft, which is actually something that people might actually get to see. You can skip that step by getting ChatGPT to do it, which it can save a lot of time, especially if it's a subject that you're not hugely au fait with. You can use tone of voice guides, tone of voice tips I talked about when we were writing the bulk content. You can do the same thing here and get it to use your tone of voice when you're getting it to write a longer article. I tend not to bother because I know I'm going to do a big rewrite on anything at this stage. But that's up to you. See what works best for you. But you will need to do a pretty deep redraft to make something of a properly decent quality that you're going to want to have as a promoted thing on your website. Apart from anything else, AI does miss stuff and it does make stuff up, and it won't match your tone of voice however much you ask it to. There's loads more you can do with this, absolutely tons. But hopefully there's a few starting points there that you can roll with, jump off with, try them out, see if they work for you, twist them to your own needs, and experiment, I guess. So next up, I'm going to talk a little bit about AI image generation. I've kind of talked about how I wouldn't recommend using AI as a replacement for a writer. In the same way, I wouldn't suggest that you use it as a replacement for your illustrator or photographer. Think of it more as a replacement or a complement to your Shutterstock account, in that, it's not going to be the greatest images. It's not going to be the perfect bespoke pictures of your products, but it'll get the images that you need to illustrate your point in a blog article or similar. I'm only going to scratch the surface here because there's an absolute ton you could talk about And I'm mainly going to talk about Midjourney because it's head and shoulders above everything else at the moment. DALL-E 3 is getting better, but it's not there. With the copy stuff, I have stuck to the free versions, but with image generation, if you want anything decent, you're going to have to pay for it. So if you want anything decent, you're basically going to have to pay for Midjourney. But you can get some really good results from it. Somebody, when I tested this presentation before, somebody said, "What's the picture of a boat?" It's the Midjourney logo. So there you go. It's really powerful, Midjourney. It's also a bit weird and nerdy in the way you access it. So you don't just log on to the Midjourney website and type your prompts into there. You do everything through a Discord server. There's plenty of tutorials online on how to do it. Once you're online, once you're there, it's pretty straightforward. All the images you do create are stored on your profile on the Midjourney website, so you can always go back to them. They're also publicly available, so anybody can access them and use them. So you can use anything you generate on Midjourney commercially, but theoretically, so can anybody else, which is where the kind of stock photography analogy works quite well. So the first key thing to remember with Midjourney, mountain bikes again, because as I mentioned, I like bikes. When you type prompts into your Discord, you have to start it with /imagine. If you don't start it with that, Midjourney doesn't know that you're asking it to create something. It thinks you're just talking to it and you won't get anything out of it. You can also use /blend or /remix, which will combine and remix images. I've had mixed results with these, but you never know, you might get something great out of it. And then you describe what you want to see, and Midjourney will make something. You can see on this one, there's various, there are various parameters you can append to it. This one's got, you add these with a --v6 in this case. That tells Midjourney to use the most current version of its model. The default at the moment is 5.2. You can also use a version 5A, which is a much faster but not quite such good quality version. So if you're generating a lot of images, if you use 5A, you can get a lot more for your monthly allowance because you pay for an allowance of generation hours on Midjourney. --AR is really handy. That lets you specify your aspect ratio. So you might want 10:16 or something for a phone, or 16:9 for a computer screen. --no is really handy if you want to exclude something from your image. So Midjourney is quite famously bad at hands. So sometimes it'll get hands perfect, sometimes it'll get them terrible. If all your images are getting hands with 7 fingers that are pointing off at weird directions, just tell it not to put any hands in, and that can solve your problem quite easily. Sometimes, like with this one, you get really lucky first time and you'll get something pretty much spot on. So the reason sometimes though, you'll need to kind of work on it further to get exactly what you want. Sometimes you might just go back to the drawing board and reword your prompt completely. Sometimes you can create variations, which I'll talk about in a second, on one of the images that it's done, and it'll just tweak it slightly. Generally, when you're prompting Midjourney, you need to be quite concise. If you give it more than about 40 words, it'll start to ignore stuff at the end. And the more you write beyond that, the more it's going to ignore. So you need to think a little bit about your prompts. But you also need to be descriptive to give it something to work on. Otherwise, it doesn't know what you're going to want. I find giving it context rather than writing a detailed description can work a lot better than. So in this example that I've done here, instead of asking it for yellowy brown rocks and green trees and golden sunlight, I've told it that I wanted an enduro trail in Finale, and it's pretty much nailed that straight away. So think about what you're prompting and how you're doing it, and you can get some pretty good results. Oh, there we go. So you're not limited to photography. I find actually you're more likely to get better results going for a more artistic style. You just, again, ask it to imagine and tell it the style you want. In this case, I've gone for a watercolor. And there you go. This was literally one of the first images it spat out for this prompt. You can ask it to create something in the style of a particular artist, same as you can ask ChatGPT to write like a particular person. I found this a bit dubious ethically, especially if you plan on using it commercially or publishing it. But it's something I quite like to play with. I write fiction as well as writing commercially, and that can be like getting it to draw a picture of something that you're trying to describe can be a really good way to visualize it to help you describe it. So when Midjourney creates your image, you get all these little buttons underneath it. U stands for upscale, V stands for vary. So if image 4 is pretty close but not right, you can hit V4 and you'll get 4 new images based off of that one. You can keep doing this until you get the perfect image. It'll just keep using your generation minutes. And then when you're happy, if you hit U, you can get a high-res version. You can get a pretty decent high-quality version out of there if you need it. Now, if you want, you can import your own images into Midjourney and ask it to work on them. And who hasn't wanted to see themselves as a Power Ranger? If you want to do this, firstly, the image has to be online and the address has to finish with .jpeg or .png, which means you can't just use a Google image. You have to put the link at the start of the prompt, then any description you want, and then the parameters at the end as usual. Results can be extremely varied. Generally, the better the photo you put in and the better prompt you write, as with anything else, the better you'll get out. I think the best thing to do with Midjourney, if it's something you're interested in, is sign up for a month, dive in there and just start creating stuff. Because of the way it works, because of the way you do it on Discord, you can do it in a public chat room, so you can see what other people are prompting and what results they're getting out of it, which I actually find that can be really useful because you can see well, I mean, some of it's just really bizarre, but you can see what's working for people and what's not, and apply that to your stuff moving forwards. So we talked a little bit about planning and writing content. We talked about image generation. Now I'm just going to talk a little bit about how I use AI to kind of improve what I've written and improve my writing day to day. There's a few really good ways you can do this and for really good techniques, both using the chat models and using standalone tools. So I'm just going to quickly talk through some of those. So I don't generally necessarily like getting AI to rewrite stuff, but it's really handy if this, for example, if there's a style of writing you want to avoid in your context, in your content, and I've used passive voice as an example here, you can just ask ChatGPT to find it, and it'll just highlight, it'll point out all the passive voice in your copy. Then if you're feeling lazy, you can always just get it to rewrite the content, removing the passive voice. You can do it, and there's quite a lot more you can do with this. You always want to read over anything you get ChatGPT to rewrite, as quite often the rewritten bits will really stand out amongst your copy as being different. But it's a really nice way to, I prefer to actually rewrite it myself anyway. And it's a really nice way to learn where you're getting that passive voice in and how to train yourself to rewrite it. It's a good way to get sharper, snappier copy. Just getting it to rewrite the whole article almost ends up really bad, but being super specific can work really well. So this can work quite well as well, depending on what mood the AI is in. I'm sure they have moods. So the first thing to remember is ChatGPT is not a master copywriter or an SEO expert, but it can be pretty handy in pointing you in the right direction to refine your page. It's not going to turn rubbish into gold, but if you've got something that's pretty decent and you just want a few little tips to maybe a few little things that you maybe haven't quite thought of, it can be really handy. It's the kind of thing where if you're up to your eyes in writing it and you can't look at it objectively and you haven't got someone else to run it past, SEO is kind of like a really good reader, I guess. The SEO, the advice it gives you will often be really generic and a bit too generic to be useful, but you will get the odd gem. So if you know what you're talking about and you know your SEO and you know your copywriting, you'll spot the stuff that it picks up, the gems, and it will just give you those extra few ideas to just get it from being pretty good to, oh, that's really good, that's ready to go. Quite often it'll decide to rewrite it instead of just giving you a critique. If it does this, just ask it why it's rewritten it in that way, and it'll go through why it's rewritten each section and what it's changed. I find it quite useful at this like first draft stage, to give myself those ideas. Like I say, those ideas that I just haven't thought of. It's like having an extra pair of eyes on your page. Or if I'm rewriting somebody else's copy, it can give me some kind of useful pointers that I've just not quite picked up for whatever reason. This is actually one of my favorites, getting it to rewrite and shorten. So when you're writing copy, we all know in our heads that writing shorter, snappier copy is better. I've mentioned earlier that I write my first drafts without worrying about stuff like word count, without worrying about it being short and snappy, and then go back and chop it down later on. ChatGPT is actually really good at this. So I just before I came on here, I did a test paragraph, and it literally cut in half without losing any of the meaning. Admittedly, it was intentionally a bit wordy to start with, but that's still quite a decent drop. You need to be careful with this, because if you strip out too much, you can just end up with it being bland, and you lose your tone of voice, and it goes back to being AI text. So quite often you'll find you'll get AI to cut it down, and then you'll actually put a few words back in just to make it read like it's actually being written by a human. I wouldn't recommend getting it to shorten whole page or article unless it's something that you're planning on rewriting from there. If you've got a very long wordy article that you know needs to be cut down, you can always get it to cut it down into rewrite the whole thing and then start your first draft from there. Be wary if you do this that you don't lose important meaning from the text. But with a lot of AI stuff, this I find it can get you sort of 2/3, 3/4 of the way to what you want with very little effort, which is it can speed things up a lot. So I'm just going to finish up by talking about a couple of apps that I have installed that I use for writing pretty much every day. So you've probably already heard of Grammarly. I have it as a plugin for Google Docs. You can get it for Word, whatever you use it, and it'll highlight all your grammatical errors and fix them for you. It's kind of like a bit like the old paperclip from Word, if you're old enough to remember that, except it's less annoying and it works really well. It's like the autocorrect in Google Docs on steroids. You won't always agree with it, and you shouldn't be a slave to it, because if you just let it rewrite everything and change everything, you run the risk of you losing your voice, because the voice you use won't always be perfectly grammatically correct, and it won't always be the most efficient way of writing something. And that's really important. And I actually prefer the free version of Grammarly for this reason. The paid version, I find you end up it rewrites everything, and suddenly it sounds like everybody else who's got the pro version of Grammarly. The free version does have quite a cool AI rewriting facility. So you can highlight a passage and ask Grammarly to either rewrite or shorten it. You can only do a few prompts each month, I think, and it's way less flexible than using ChatGPT. But if you're just struggling with something in the middle of writing and you just want to quickly get a bit of help, you know it's not right and it's bugging you, it can be really useful. Hemingway is another favorite of mine. So Ernest Hemingway was famous for his very simple stripped back prose. And that's exactly what this app does. So it's just hemingway.app, I think, the address. You can just paste your text into it and it will highlight hard to read sentences, passive voice, and overly complex phrases. And it'll handily count how many you have of each one down the side. It'll even tell you if it thinks you've got too many or if it thinks you've got enough that it's just about okay. If you pay, it'll rewrite them for you. Usual caveats, same as with Grammarly. here. Or you can go through and tweak it yourself, which I quite like doing. I find it improves my writing, and the more I do it, the more I write, the better I get, and the fewer overly long sentences there are in there. It can be really good as well. Again, if you're rewriting an article that you know is just full of jargon and overly long sentences, to kind of point you in the right direction. And there's no reason I quite like to do this as well. Is to stick it into Hemingway, pick up the worst complex sentences, and then get ChatGPT to rewrite them, then rewrite them again, to actually get something that you really want. And I think I've covered quite a lot today. Hopefully, some of it has been useful and interesting to you. I think the key thing to remember is that everything I've said today, everything I've looked at, is just a starting point. It works for me. It's worked on the tasks that I've needed it to. Every time I try something, I tweak it and change it. So get stuck in there. Try some of these ideas, experiment and see what works for you. See how you can work it into your workflow and how you can use it to save you time so you can focus more time on the interesting stuff and the fun stuff. Feel free to drop me an email or look me up on LinkedIn. And has anyone got any questions?
I guess whilst we see if any questions pop through, I think just firstly, Will, thank you very much for a comprehensive look at AI and how we can be using it. I think the key takeaway for everyone from this will be that you've missed your calling in life as a Power Ranger. And for me, I think what you really showed in there, and from what I've seen when I've been using AI as well, is about how it's really good for that bulk content. But as soon as you start to try and look to position you and use expertise, that's where it misses, because that's where it misses that human element. And that's why for everyone, I think everyone will breathe a bit easier knowing it's not going to be taking everyone's jobs overnight, and we won't be out because it just can't give that human element just yet. But we'll see off the back of that. So lots of messages coming through from the chat here, Will.
Correct.
Is the basic plan of Midjourney good enough, or do you need to be on a higher plan?
I've only ever used the basic plan. It depends how many images you want to crank out. I've never hit the limit, but I don't crank out that many. So try it on the basic plan, I guess, and if you need more, pay for more.
And can you confirm a point from Darren? Was that presentation done by AI, or did you actually put it together yourself?
I actually put it all together myself, but there was a lot of AI testing done throughout. All the images were AI.
And are you a human or a robot right now?
Yes.
Cool. Just check to see if there's any more off the back of that. Do you find AI generated content to do better on socials and LinkedIn than content just written by yourself? That's a question from Elizabeth.
I don't know is the answer to that. I've never really tried using AI generated content on my socials. What I have found though is when I see AI content from somebody else, it usually stands out as being AI content. The thing I like about the socials is that it is social, and you're connecting with real people. So I would, but in terms of reach, I've no idea.
Yeah, I've tried it more from the content creation side. I don't particularly like it, and I feel like if you go through LinkedIn now, you can start, as you start using it more, you can pick out the posts by people that have used AI, especially from a marketing side. ChatGPT, I see it really likes to talk about the dynamic world of digital marketing, and it just fluffs up the language a lot. And I can tell when people put those posts out on LinkedIn, you go, that's AI. There's a certain structure that it uses that I found, and you can see repetition between different people on socials of the post they're using, and they have just copy and pasted and chucked it out. Yes, it can give you that point of view, get your content out, but it's all very generic is what I find, and that's why it probably takes you 60, 70, 80% of the way. But that missing 20% you can have at the top end is the important bit that gives you the chance to showcase your personal expertise, but also the expertise that you have as a brand and your point of difference.
Yeah, I'd fully agree with that. That last bit that you put in, it's like cooking it. It's like if you don't add that, you might as well not bother, because somebody could have just gone to ChatGPT and asked it.
Yeah, definitely. Just back on Mid-Journey, free or paid. Matthew's just commented saying it's great on mid. The free version is great, but the biggest advantage of paid is create your own server and not have to filter through everyone else's images to find yours. So probably just a bit easier in terms of the way that you manage it. If you guys do have any more questions, feel free to get in touch with Will or with myself. I can pass them on to him. You'll have seen in the chat we'll be back in about 6 weeks' time with our next webinar with the brilliant Marisa Crimlis Brown. She is going to be talking about how to get content out of busy people. So we're continuing the content theme here, building on this. And when we all know those problems you have in a business where you've got certain people you want to be your thought leaders, but they just don't have the time to give you what you need from them. She's going to be talking through how we can do that and the different pillars from a content strategy. I've seen her do the talk before. She's brilliant, fantastic, one of the most engaging speakers I've seen. Follow the link that's in there and then get signed up. And we'll also resend that through once we send across the video from today's. But yeah, thank you everyone for attending. And
I've just spotted a couple more questions in the question
yeah,
and answer, not in the chat. I didn't realize it was a separate thing. So
on the Q&A bit, yeah.
someone said, anonymous has said, could you use AI to create job adverts, and how would you maintain consistency? I think kind of what Andy was just saying covers that, in that you could use your AI to create your advert structure and your basic copy. But actually, the way you maintain consistency is that last 20% is that you'll be rewriting it in your brand's tone of voice, and that's how you get that consistency across it. If I read a job advert from that was fully written in AI, I think it would probably be a red flag for me. Certainly, as a writer, it would. I wouldn't like it. Joanne said, we'd like to know if there are any copyright issues that have arisen through use of AI-generated imagery with apps like Midjourney. This is quite a contentious point at the moment. I don't know loads about it, but I do know that there's a lot of talk around what the AIs are trained on and whether the artists that have created those original artworks should be paid for them. I don't think, as far as I know, that it's made it as far as court yet, or any kind of conclusions have been made. And I don't think that there would be any issues with the end user using artworks that they've created on Midjourney. It's more issues with Midjourney's training of their AI that's the problem. So that doesn't exactly answer your question. The short answer is I don't know. The long answer is, well, that.
You try not to leave yourself open to getting sued here, aren't you?
Yeah, very much so. Yeah.
And we've got another question from Elizabeth asking about, you talk about inputting a spreadsheet into GPT. Are there any GDPR issues around that?
Yes, probably. It would depend on, yeah. I would, for me, it would very much depend on what you're uploading. I would not be happy uploading any kind of confidential information that I wasn't happy to share with the world onto AI. Legally speaking, there might be issues. I certainly wouldn't want to do anything without looking into it. When I was talking about uploading a spreadsheet, I was more talking about taking those that base copy, if you like, the copy that you want your AI to rewrite, and uploading that. So you're essentially uploading copy that's already on the web into ChatGPT, so it can already see it anywhere. I wouldn't fancy chancing it with anything.
That's it. I'd stay away from that just because there would be questions around who's the data processor and who's the data controller. But
yeah,
you're inputting it, and the other parties, we know that these platforms are then using the information that's put in through prompts to help them to fine tune their algorithms essentially and their responses for future ones. So that could then be taken into consideration for future feedback that other people using the platform could get. And it's keep any personal information out there, I guess, would be the safest way of safeguarding against that.
Yeah, I think that's pretty much it.
Perfect. Well, thanks a lot to Will. Thanks a lot to everyone for attending. As I said, we'll send this across. please do shout out with any questions that you do have, because I can see there's been a hell of a lot of feedback there. And yeah, we'll hopefully get Will back on here in the future to give us an update in terms of where this goes, because we're seeing so many changes so quickly in this area.
I suspect if I did something like this in a year's time or even 6 months, it'd be very different.
Definitely. All right. Well, thanks a lot, everyone, and speak soon.
See you later.
Bye bye.